Hello and welcome to another episode of Conversing on Africa's Peace, a monthly podcast focused on the African Union's Peace and Security Council and key related issues, which is produced as a collaboration between the Australian Embassy here in Addis Ababa and Amani Africa Research and Media Services. My name's Adam, and I'm pleased to have been able to turn a professional and personal interest in Africa's peace and security landscape into a podcast with some real experts on the topic. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by not one, but two members of Amani Africa's Brains Trust, Betania Tadesse and Sion Hagos. Welcome to you both. How are you going?
Really great, Adam. Great to be back.
Thanks for having us.
As you said, Betania, great to be back, and I'll come back to that in a second. Thanks for joining me today, and welcome to all of our listeners. As we always do with this podcast, we start by quickly taking a look back at last month's Peace and Security Council work. And I always say, well, what a busy month it was last month, every month, but May really does seem to have been a packed month at the African Union Peace and Security Council, but also very topically in terms of African issues being discussed at the United Nations Security Council, and Amani was directly involved in that. So we'll take a look at some of that stuff from May before we look forward to June. Firstly, Betania, I have to congratulate you and Amani on your great work briefing the United Nations Security Council in the last week or two on this interesting question of financing African peace support operations. It's been a long-standing debate and discussion going back many years. And when we discussed this issue last month, Betania, you very modestly didn't tell me you were going to the United Nations, and then we saw you pop up on social media in New York last week. Absolutely amazing and well done. But from your perspective, tell us a little bit, first of all, about the Peace and Security Council here in Addis last month, and then share with us a little bit of the debate on the 25th of May in New York.
Thank you, Adam. So as you rightly pointed out, May was very packed, both with the PSC under Uganda's chairship, but also there were very interesting engagements in the UN Security Council under Switzerland's presidency. So if I may highlight perhaps two agenda items which really were particularly important for last month engagement for the PSC, but also for the UN Security Council. If I can start with the financing bit on peace support operations, and for African Union-led PSOs to have access to UNSS contribution, I think that received a lot of attention both here in Addis, but also in New York. So the one in Addis, there was a ministerial meeting actually convened by Uganda, which it discussed a number of issues pertinent to financing, not just the UNSS contribution aspect, but also from the developments taking place within the continent through African, institutions and mechanisms, namely the Peace Fund, and how that is also supporting existing initiatives within the continent. And there were a number of decisions, of course, that came out from the ministerial meeting, as you may know, particularly in relation to elevating the figures of the crisis reserve facility,
right,
to also support some of the funding gaps of ATMIS, but also the PSC also used this session to signal to the A3 to also resume the negotiation process of within the UN Security Council, particularly on the financing aspect of the UPSOs. So in that sense, it was a very interesting session, but also in terms of providing a bit of context for example, for particularly requesting for UN Security Council to also devise effective response models. Because at the moment, there is a lot of discussion to what extent existing peacekeeping, for example, operations are responding to the security challenge of the continent.
Yeah.
So it would be also very interesting to have a bit of follow-up on that. And of course, the PSC also requested for specific working modalities between the AU and the UN to also take this this agenda forward, because it would definitely require a bit of coordination between Addis and New York.
Totally.
Particularly when, the negotiation process, the consultation also will start at the UN Security Council level.
Yeah. So I feel like it's a good thing. The impasse that's been in place for a few years, probably really, between the UN and the AU seems to be passing, and the negotiations are restarting, and that signals perhaps that there may be a resolution at some point. So I'm really encouraged to see that.
So maybe just to point out, based on what you just mentioned, there is definitely that conducive environment to the negotiation process. There is a better understanding on both sides. Both the UN Security Council, the PSC, the AU-UN have a better understanding of the issue at hand as well. Also, the fact that we have now the consensus paper, that we have the Secretary General's report, which was a clear signal supporting this agenda and Africa's priority to have access to this. To have access to better, predictable and flexible funding to support peace support operations. I think the adoption of those landmark instruments as well, it really gave a bit of push to the whole process as well.
Yeah, and to our listeners, I can recommend Amani's paper on this issue. Came out a few weeks ago. It goes into a bit more of the history, as well as the issues that are sort of under the microscope today in light of the consensus paper and also Guterres's response paper as well. So, well done for all of that good work last month from Amani, and obviously the conflict in Sudan continues to be front and centre of people's attention, and we'll come back to that in the context of some of my later questions. So as we look ahead to June, Zimbabwe will be the chair for the Peace and Security Council that month. The insight document, the analysis of the provisional program of work that Amani has put together highlights that there'll be 6 substantive sessions across the month. 2 of the sessions will address country or regional specific issues, while the remaining 4 will cover thematic topics. All sessions except for one, my understanding is, will be held at ministerial level. One session at ministerial level, the rest at ambassadorial level. I apologise. And as I said, noting the ongoing conflict in Sudan, I guess we might expect some kind of update to the PSC at some point across the month, depending on the status of a ceasefire or progress around any type of negotiations for stopping the fighting. And we can talk about that later. So early in the month of June, I understand that we are due to see the Peace and Security Council's Military Staff Committee undertake a field visit to Somalia from 5 to 7 June, and then to report on its findings later on in the month, around the 19th of June. I guess ATMIS transition arrangements and the details around ATMIS activities will be the focus here. So I'm interested to hear your reflections on that, and also I should say, really sad to see the deadly attack on that ATMIS force base by Al-Shabaab last month. Britannia, what do you make of this field trip?
Yes, so this field trip actually, is an outcome of many conversations that were happening within the PSC, but also at the regional level, particularly with the troop contributing countries. If you may recall, in April they had a summit level meeting, particularly to discuss the procedures and the process leading up to the drawdown of ATMIS troops, which is the first drawdown is scheduled for the end of this month, June 30th. 2,000 troops are expected to withdraw from Somalia. So in terms of having, a clear understanding and assessment of the security situation on the ground, the Military Staff Committee will be, going to Somalia and to do that assessment of the security situation on the ground, and also this is also very timely given how the security situation also remains a bit volatile in Somalia, and Al-Shabaab still remains a threat. And particularly with this recent attack on ATMIS base in Bulomarer base in Somalia, it's also an indication of how the threat is also very much still serious in Somalia. Yeah. So, but one thing that the TCCs during the summit level meeting, what they also emphasized is, while they agreed for the troop drawdown, but they also underlined the importance of having like a preparation for a joint assessment to understand better the situation in Somalia, but also to have a joint assessment even to plan the next withdrawal, which is also again scheduled for September, the additional 3,000 troops.
Right.
So all of this actually requires a lot of coordination.
Yeah.
A lot of coordination and harmonization between the different actors, troop contributing countries, the AU. So it requires a lot of preparation to undertake this kind of mission.
Yeah, it sounds really complex and really important that it be done well. Like, the gains in Somalia are real, but they are somewhat fragile, as we can see from the recent attacks and setbacks. So we wish that visit well, and we look forward to hearing what they find and what comes out of that visit later in the month. Sion, welcome to you. Your first time joining us on the podcast. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Looking at the first sort of substantive session of the Peace and Security Council, it's going to be on the 13th of June, so a little bit later in the month, which will be an update to the Council on the situation in the Central African Republic. Obviously, the general security situation in CAR remains fragile, clearly, and I understand the key topics will relate to the AU military observer mission to the CAR and the work of the AU mission sort of more broadly in Central African Republic, and also, I imagine, a bit of a look at preparations for the upcoming and local regional elections.
So yes, Adam, it's like you said, we can basically expect the session to have two main focal areas. The first one being, of course, like you said, the integration of MOCA into the now AU mission in CAR. Mm-hmm. So maybe just to provide some brief highlight or a background on this topic, MOCA was authorized by the PSC in July of 2020. Its core mandate was basically to provide support in monitoring the implementation of the political agreement for peace and reconciliation in CAR.
Yeah.
But obviously, on account of multiple reasons, this mission could not really be fully operationalized to realize its mandate. So the PSC did attempt to trigger some consultation with main funders, including the EU. But so the fact that it did not really become effective on the ground upon being deployed at the beginning was not a convincing factor to now allow further funding. So the mission had to come to an end. So as we recall, at its previous session, it was the 11-16 session. At the end of October 2022, the PSC decided for MOCA to be integrated within the AU mission in CAR.
Yeah.
So basically, this is what we expect to hear at the coming session, to see whether the AU mission is actually capable enough, whether it does have the capacity to now implement MOCA's mandates in addition to what it was already mandated to carry out in CAR.
And the question around elections, local/regional elections, multiple kind of deferrals or postponements. Where are we at with these elections? Are they looking like they're going to go ahead, or is that still an open question?
So actually these are the regional and local elections, and it's interesting because it will be happening after decades, like 35 years to be exact.
Since those local elections, right? Yeah, yes. Which is a long time.
Yes, because they had them in 1988. It was the last time they actually had the local and regional elections. So it's a bit of a big deal, but a more interesting development, which might actually impact on whether these elections will take place or not, is the recent announcement by President Ouattara that he would now like to have a constitutional referendum as a hot issue. So we don't know how that would play out and how opposition parties would actually react to this.
It's sort of been bubbling away there for a while, hasn't it, as a potential issue, and time will tell if that referendum or if that constitutional change is actually enacted. So again, we'll watch that with great interest. Moving on in the month, Britannia, on the 15th of June, there's an update on the situation in the Horn of Africa, which we understand obviously will pretty much focus on the conflict in Sudan, maybe not exclusively, but that will certainly be a focus, and its regional impacts. Sudan is certainly rightfully getting a lot of attention from the Peace and Security Council at the moment. And I guess even today, as we sit here and record, it is a little bit hard to see where things will be in a couple of weeks in the middle of June. But what do you assess will be on the table at that session?
Absolutely, Adam. I think things are evolving, and the situation, of course, remains still very fluid, and there are a lot of changes happening on the ground. But when we focus on the diplomatic efforts, both the AU but other actors as well, if you may recall, in May there were a number of sessions within the PSC, particularly including one at the Senate level. But also, I think more broadly, the AU had also a number of engagements, particularly with this expanded mechanism kind of a structure that was being led by the Commission to have, to also advance the mediation process, but also to respond to the crisis in Sudan. But one thing that came out very strongly, I think, from the PSC side is for the peace process, but also for this mediation process to be very much inclusive, for the African Union and regional bodies, the continental bodies to be well represented in this processes. And one thing that's, in addition to that, I think that the PSC also made reference to is to avoid any kind of multiplicity of parallel processes that much, that can actually derail the whole process.
Which I think is a fair point.
Absolutely. We need to have that's very inclusive, but yet it has to be a consolidated peace process. So those things really came out very strongly in the outcome documents about inclusivity, about having this unified kind of process. It also, of course, welcomed the Jeddah peace process, but at the moment, the Jeddah process itself is also has been suspended. So that has also implication on ongoing efforts. But I think it's really important again to have an understanding of the structure. We have from within the AU we have this expanded mechanism. But there was a decision to also have a core group that will be also leading the process, the activities of the expanded mechanism, right? So, but it's good to have a bit of clarity. I think that's also an important work that the AU also needs to work on, to have clarity on who will be in the core group and what exactly is the terms of reference of that group as well. I
mean, as we sit here, these are the questions directly under consideration by the expanded mechanism, and we can only hope, I'm sure we will find out more detail in the next few days and get some clarity around their membership, their priorities and timelines and stuff like that. And let's hope there's some more positive things to be discussed by the 15th of June.
Exactly, that would be 2-month anniversary since the whole crisis started as well. So I think in the statement that the chairperson also delivered during the summit level PSC session, I think he also provided a very a clear message in terms of, that there is that risk of this crisis transforming in actual civil war. All the indications are also leading towards that. So there is that risk that we also need to be very vigilant about. So. And there is the AU roadmap for the resolution of the conflict in Sudan, this de-escalation kind of effort. So this 6 pillars kind of plan that is currently being, that currently guides this engagement as well. So it's important to also get more clarity on where we are on that roadmap and how it's being executed and who's doing what.
Yeah.
So it's important to have that, at least that's clarity on the diplomatic efforts for this PSC session.
Yeah, well, we wish all the sort of interested parties well in that process. It's really important work, and we have to hope for the best there, as I say. Of course, other issues remain on the agenda at the Peace and Security Council, Sion, and lots of other issues and conflicts and administrative matters to be considered. On the 16th of June, for example, the Peace and Security Council Committee of Experts will meet to discuss a few different things: arrangements for the AU Sanctions Committee, the AU Ministerial Committee on Counter-Terrorism coming out of Malabo, and to reflect on the working arrangements between the PSC and the 3 African members of the UNSC, known as the A3. These are also really weighty topics that are receiving a lot of attention. What outcomes can we expect from that session?
It's like you say, they are quite weighty issues, quite technical, and might not get the kind of attention that conflicts are getting, but very important at the same time. So the 2 committees that you mentioned, for instance, are very relevant, looking at what the continent is facing at the moment in terms of unconstitutional change of government and terrorist expansion throughout the continent. So having these committees or having the establishment of both committees finalized is a very important and critical factor to ensure that the PSC gets the kind of support that it actually needs to respond to these situations on the ground. And the other one is, of course, around the modalities or working modalities for PSC and A3 engagement. Again, this is a very important and timely topic, particularly looking at where we are with the financing issue.
Yeah, connects directly there.
Exactly, Tanya mentioned earlier. So, but in terms of outcome, the June meeting is really expected to have consultations or further consultation to the retreat that the Committee of Experts had end of May.
Yep.
But once they actually consult over it, we can expect perhaps a briefing to the PSC, but we don't know when this will happen in concrete terms yet.
Okay. Moving through the month, mindful of time, we look at the 20th of June, and it's the first thematic session for the month, and it's a consideration of the AU's flagship program, Silencing the Guns. I understand this will include a briefing for the new AU High Representative for Silencing the Guns, Mohammed Ibn Chambas, and I guess this is an opportunity to track progress of the initiative in the light of, unfortunately, the many ongoing conflicts on the continent.
True, that's correct. But one important role, of course, this session could play is in providing some highlights to the PSC and, of course, to the wider audience as well, on what some of the concrete steps that the special representative, the newly appointed special representative, envisages are in order to achieve the goals of silencing the guns.
Yeah.
And, of course, this becomes even more critical in light of the fast approaching deadline for achieving the goals. I mean, 2030 is not that far from where we are right now.
Yeah, I guess so.
So, but further to that, it's like you said, the meeting could also serve as an opportunity to really reflect on where the continent is right now.
Yeah.
Also, why we are facing setbacks and deterioration.
Yeah.
I mean, the case of Sudan is a very good example of going backwards. So it's really a chance to reflect for the PSC, for the wider AU as well. What really needs to change? What concrete action needs to be taken to address this issue?
I guess you've got to be realistic about the state of play, but at the same time maintaining a positivity and a proactive kind of approach to the initiative to make it meaningful. So, we look forward to that session. And Sion, I'm going to stick with you again to the next session, which is the ministerial level meeting for the month. An interesting one on the implementation of the Common African Defence and Security Policy and relevant instruments. And I understand that at least partly this will look at the Africa Standby Force and related issues. What can you tell me about that?
Yes, so the focus of this session is really to look at the status of operationalization of the African Standby Force. And the expectation is really mainly for the Peace and Security Council to be briefed on where regional economic communities are on their ongoing efforts to enhance their respective regional standby brigades. In connection with that, it would also, of course, be interesting for the PSC to receive some updates on where the respective RECs and regional mechanisms are really with confirming and availing their pledged capabilities.
Right.
Because having a look at previous discussions on this topic, this was one of the main sticky points, or the challenge that was being faced with respect to fully operationalizing the standby force.
Gotcha.
And aside from that, also, of course, coming a few weeks after the 15th ordinary session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Defense, Safety and Security, this session might also look into some of the issues that were tabled for that ordinary session. And one of these was, of course, the finalization of the MOU between AU and RECs on deployment and employment of ASAFE, a very important aspect of really operationalizing the standby force.
Okay, absolutely, I understand. Moving on, we're getting through the month. The 27th of June is the 5th substantive session, which has got a couple of really interesting topics under discussion. The continental sort of early warning and security outlook, an opportunity to, I guess, to look at those early warning mechanisms in place across the continent and to assess their effectiveness and their performance, and what else could be done around early warning, because it seems like it's so important to have these early warning systems, but it's really hard to get them right, if my understanding is accurate.
I believe you're correct about that, Adam. So as critical as it is, early warning is unfortunately not really receiving the level of attention that it requires. The AU is really fairly rich in tools and mechanisms to actually engage in early warning and prevention of conflicts, but the problem is that these are not really utilized effectively in order to have the desired impact. So one encouraging development, of course, again, to be positive and to look at what's actually working, one encouraging development that has been noted over the past couple of years, we can say, is PSC's increased dedication of sessions like this one to receive briefings on security outlook and early warning signs in the continent. PSC's engagement with the Panel of the Wise, which was also restored in March of this year after a few years of pause, is again another good sign of some sort of increasing weight that is being placed on prevention of conflicts through the deployment of preventive diplomacy. Again, although it is yet to be successfully convened, the PSC has also been planning to do a sort of a review exercise on the implementation of the Continental Structural Conflict Prevention Framework. So this would be really essential in terms of understanding what sort of structural and governance issues different countries are facing before they actually now manifest in violent conflicts.
I guess it takes a certain type of government or a certain type of member state to actually put its hand up and say, all the early warning signs are here, African Union, can you come to our assistance? Or can you, deploy the mechanisms to secure the situation, which is not something perhaps that states are comfortable doing necessarily, which makes it a challenge.
In fact, one of the issues that the PSC highlighted in its previous sessions was the fact that member states usually invoke sovereignty as a way of, but I think it's all about finding the right way to engage.
Exactly, I completely agree. Well, we'll look forward to that session with interest. At the end of the month, on the 29th of June, Sion, is the annual consultative meeting with the Pan-African Parliament, which is like a standing thing in line with Peace and Security Council protocols. Tell me a little bit more about what happens at these meetings and why they're held.
So, essentially the purpose of the PSC's consultative meetings with AU organs is to enable exchange of ideas on how the Council could collaborate with these organs in pursuit of advancing realization of its mandate.
Right.
The one with the Pan-African Parliament it is in fact envisaged under Article 18 of the PSC protocol. So it's basically within this framework that the PSC will be engaging with the Parliament. So we'll see how it pans out. Yeah.
Okay, and they come. The Pan African Parliament membership comes to Addis, or is it online? Or I'm not sure how it's going to meet this time, because the Pan African Parliament's based in South Africa, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The modalities were not really specified, but it's possible that it could be a virtual meeting.
Okay, very interesting. Well, that brings us nearly to the end of another episode, and as we always say, all the very best to the chair, Zimbabwe, as it takes on the agenda of the Peace and Security Council for June. And we wish everyone taking part in the work of the PSC fruitful deliberations on all of these important topics that we've discussed here today. The work of the Peace and Security Council is so important, and I'm really pleased to be able to discuss it with such distinguished commentators such as yourself, Sion. A great first appearance, and thank you as always to you, Britannia. I'd also like our listeners, or I'd like to encourage you to dig a little bit deeper into Peace and Security Council work by accessing Amani's wide range of Peace and Security Council analytical products, including the insights on the provisional program of work for each month, which the Australian Embassy is pleased to support. And we also hope this podcast is useful as an accompaniment to that work. We hope the podcast continues to provide sort of accessible and easy way to understand the Peace and Security Council. Before we go, as usual, we'd like to wish the following African states happy National Days of Celebration. In June, we have Mozambique on the 25th of June, Madagascar on the 26th of June, Djibouti on the 27th, and the Seychelles on the 29th. And finally, the Democratic Republic of the Congo on 30th of June. We wish you all peace and prosperity.
Thanks for joining us for this month Conversing on Africa's Peace podcast, the collaboration between Amani Africa and the Australian Embassy in Addis. We hope you have a great month, and we'll be back next month to consider the PSC's agenda for July. Thank you again.